Who could ever forget Altered Beast, Sega's attention-grabbing arcade game and the Sega Mega Drive pack-in title that launched an era of gaming. But the Altered Beast series features a lot more games than most people think. In this video, we're diving into every Beasley chapter of the franchise, from a game that burst onto the scene with its iconic "Wise from your grave" to every lesser celebrated transformation since. Altered Beast is unforgettable, melding Greek mythology with a raw, arcade-style thrill that fans will always remember. So whether you're a long-time fan or merely a curious tourist looking to learn about the world of lycanthropic warriors and mystic powers, join us as we unleash the full history and evolution of this iconic brand. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is the epic rise and fall of Altered Beast, the Ultimate Series Retrospective. Yeah! Arcade-style beat-em-ups, you've got to love this fine genre. While a period existed in the mid-90s where certain brands were trying to pivot away from this style of play, fortunately brilliant brawlers are back, and we have found ourselves living through a beat-em-up renaissance period. Score massive discounts on incredible modern beat-em-ups like Double Dragon Gaiden, Streets of Rage 4, River City Girls 2, and the amazing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge, all through my affiliate links below. Save up to 90% on thousands of modern, AAA, retro, and indie titles just by using the links in my pinned comments. Snag amazing deals and support my content at the same time. Happy shopping!
Today's tale starts with a gentleman we have talked about a lot on here before, Makoto Yoshida, the legendary talent behind the awesome Golden Axe series. But prior to his involvement in that epic project, like many of us, Makoto was simply an avid gamer. You see, back in the day, Yoshida had a strong affinity for the arcades, with a love for Pac-Man in particular. This passion would ultimately lead to him pursuing a career in gaming, with his first job role being with Sega, where he would work as a play tester on a little known title known as Afterburner. Enjoying his new career, it would not be long until Yoshida would pitch a video game of his own to Sega, with the simple but novel concept of a beat-em-up where the lead playable character could become more powerful throughout a gameplay session, rather than simply losing health through a playthrough like in a traditional game. While the concept was cool and certainly novel in principle, Sega didn't feel the idea was fleshed out enough, so Yoshida would return to his play testing job, where in his downtime he would continue to refine his interesting concept. This would eventually result in his passion project becoming Altered Beast, which he would officially begin developing for Sega once the company gave him the full green light to go ahead further. As the base concept grew, to build on his idea around power progression and ultimately transformations, influence would be taken from a 1981 horror movie known as The Howling, and perhaps more amusingly, the Michael Jackson music video Thriller. However, if you have played Altered Beast, you will realise inspiration didn't end there, as further ideas were drawn from the likes of the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad movie and Jason and the Argonauts, with the stop-motion model animations by Ray Harryhausen influencing the creation of the 80s video game. Speaking of Jason and the Argonauts, this also explains how Altered Beast would receive its ancient Greek setting, which would be chosen for the powerful character Yoshida had in mind. In this conceptual phase of development, Yoshida notes that with video games at the time, it was extremely difficult to express the details of the transformations he had in his head. But lucky for him, since the game was designed to run on the Sega 16 arcade board, the emerging technology offered the function of creating large pictures, which would allow Yoshida to represent the character's metamorphosis effectively via building screen-filling transformation scenes. The purpose of such an art direction for the game was, according to Makoto, to show off flashy visuals that would surprise players. Reportedly, he would get his team to work on these now iconic transformation sequences for the game for months on end, and in addition to all of this, thanks to the System 16 board, this allowed his artists to add a huge amount of detail to the game's large and impressive character sprites. Utilising the power of Sega's arcade system meant that Altered Beast could include fantastic visual effects that could provide insane features in the game, such as limbs flying off of characters during combat for example. Scrutinising his project, Yoshida was not a fan of some of his team's early sketches, so would work closely with artists to make his very specific ideas come to life. In fact, Yoshida was so keen to make his exact ideas become a reality that the original lead designer for the game would even end up quitting the Altered Beast team due to Makoto's lofty vision and demands. Eventually, Altered Beast, to excuse the pun, would transform into the very title we all know and are well aware of. The game would be a single plain side-scrolling beat-em-up that featured light platforming elements that could even be played up to 2 players simultaneously, which was pretty impressive of a time, since cooperative beat-em-ups were in their infancy, with the original Double Dragon game only coming out a year prior. The overall premise of Altered Beast would feature gamers playing as a character who is originally dead, but resurrected and empowered by the Olympian god Zeus to act as his champion. This simple concept is illustrated further with the unforgettable soundbite in the game that says, "Rise from your grave."
Rise from your grave.
The hero's task bestowed on him by Zeus is to rescue the goddess Athena from the underworld's evil ruler known as Neph, who appears at the end of every stage as a boss taking on different forms, an altered beast, if you will. The game lets players kick, punch and jump in combat, in action that takes place across 5 different levels, each of which offer a different ancient Greek setting. Across stages, gamers must take on an assortment of aggressive undead enemies and maniacal monsters, many of which resemble creatures from various aspects of Greek mythology. Defeating certain enemies within this experience, players can then obtain Spirit Ball power-ups that allow the hero they control to increase his strength and size. If 3 of these magic spheres are successfully collected, the hero will transform into a powerful beast. These additional form factors include the likes of werewolves, bears, tigers, and even a dragon, with each of these transformations housing their own unique abilities. For example, the werebear has breath that can petrify opponents, and the dragon can fire lightning bolts. In terms of the stages where each of these magical transformations take place, players get to brawl through the Acropolis of Hades, which is a graveyard of sorts. A cave functioning as the first steps towards the underworld, a further cavern deeply carved into a rock basin, a sanctuary that serves as the gates to the underworld palace, and finally the underworld itself. Which means level design wise that these stages are a cohesive narrative that features our hero descending deeper and deeper until he reaches his final destination. The game would first see release in arcades in the summer of 1988, appearing first in Japan under the name of Jioki, a title I am definitely not going to be pronouncing right, but it roughly translates as Beast King Chronicle. When the game was new in arcades, this was a title that was instantly capable of grabbing players' attentions. Altered Beast was loud, colourful, and with its standout graphics and sound, you couldn't miss it. Offering an attract mode that showed off the epic full-screen transformations that Yoshida was so proud of, no one was going to forget seeing this game in the arcades in a hurry. Featuring the inclusion of close-ups of the metamorphosizing hero's eyes, Yoshida has noted previously it's basic human psychology to have your attention captured by big eyes, and the classic scene was intended to pump as much energy into just 5 seconds as possible. The game's loud sound effects paired with the at the time Sega 16-board state-of-the-art graphics would altogether make inserting coins into Altered Beast's slot simply irresistible for arcade goers. Everyone wanted to experience this visually impressive affair for themselves. As for the now famous gameplay involved in Altered Beast, many now agree when actually playing this alluring title that it's a lot more average than the hype and clever packaging suggests. Both the brawling and platforming can feel very slow and methodical, with the cool presentation and transformation gimmick carrying the game and drawing players in. But despite Altered Beast's flaws, the game made Sega great money in the arcades, particularly in the United States. Although a commercial success, even the game's creator himself, Makoto Yoshida, admits that the game itself has its fair share of shortcomings, which he puts partially down to his own lack of experience in creating games in 1988. Pair this with other external factors that was affecting the game's development process, such as time constraints and other issues, it's not surprising this isn't a perfect game. When it comes to ideas left on the cutting room floor, Yoshida notes that he quirkily wanted Altered Beast cabinets to feature pressure-sensitive buttons that could detect the strength of the pressure applied to them. According to him though, implementing such a feature never came to fruition due to the patent holders of the technology considering Sega's order number to be too small for it to be profitable for them to produce units. Uchida has commented in the past that, because of the lack of pressure-sensitive buttons, the number of character actions fell to half from the original concept, and the complexity of the game was decreased by this. As a result, players got tired of the game relatively soon. On the subject of this technology, it is worth adding that it was used for Capcom's 1987 Street Fighter game, with the deluxe cabinets, including these pressure-sensitive buttons. But such cabinets were plagued of issues, including players injuring themselves and the buttons wearing out too quickly, so it could be argued that Uchida and Sega made a lucky escape. Uchida has also gone on record to comment that the whole development process was very challenging for him, stating, "Altered Beasts was my first game development experience, and I didn't know how to create the fun in the gameplay, and I struggled a lot. I did manage to build some gameplay balance, but only with the advice from an experienced lead programmer. Despite all these weaknesses though, which even the game's creator admits to being there, the game was still a coin-munching monster of a title, especially as mentioned earlier in the USA. This would mean when the Sega Mega Drive was released in Europe, and the same system was released in North America as the Genesis, the console would come pre-packed with a copy of this attention-grabbing game. It seemed Sega were banking on the fact that the game's striking transformation animations would replicate the game's success in the homes, and as a result, Sega Mega Drive controllers would soon be in Western consumers' little fat hands. In regards to the accolade of Altered Beast becoming the packing game, Uchida admits that when he first heard the news about this, he did not know what to expect, but thought it was terrific and could not wait to see the results. As for the Mega Drive conversion of the game, although still decent looking for its time, the more advanced graphical elements are missing from the game, such as no more pseudo 3D exploding body parts, with the game's difficulty being driven up too. The difference was that in arcades, players could just keep inserting quarters, or 20p pieces in Mine Nation's case, but on the Sega home console, players were only given 1 credit to complete the game. Many would speculate that the high difficulty that was being included in console games of the period was to stop gamers from renting titles from Blockbuster Video, then successfully beating said title in just one night. So, by ramping up the difficulty, it was a cheap and effective way of enhancing the game's playtime, even if it did result in frustrating situations. As popular as Altered Beast was in arcades, the home conversion that allowed for a regular repeat playthrough further exposed the game's shortcomings to the public, with the title's lack of depth being even more transparent and easy to see. Altered Beast in the home didn't quite have the allure it held in the arcade, thus meaning that in the early days of Sega's 16-bit console in the West, the Sega Genesis was not panning out to be the Nintendo killer that Sega of Japan had previously envisioned. In fact, if you really did want to play this game, you didn't even need a 16-bit Sega system to do so, as Altered Beast was also released on other hardware. These different versions of the game would deliver varied results. For example, there were acceptable versions available to play on the PC Engine and Sega Master System, but there were some downright embarrassing efforts too, published to be played on microcomputer formats. In a further odd piece of gaming history, Altered Beast, while the packing game for the Genesis to help take down the NES in North America, weirdly over in Japan, Altered Beast was made available to purchase on the Nintendo Famicom. The game is obviously terrible in comparison to what could be found on the Mega Drive, but the conversion developed by Asmic did add some new stages and even transformations, allowing players to turn into a lion, a shark and a phoenix. So that's something new at least. Comment below if you fancy a standalone video on this version of the game in the future. As for the 16-bit Sega home version of the game, the one everyone has played, Sega of Japan would stand staunchly by this title, hoping that it would help elevate Genesis sales, even though things could have certainly been going better. Under Tom Kalinski's leadership though, it would be decided that Sega of America wanted to switch Altered Beast out in favour of Sonic the Hedgehog. But the US Altered Beast arcade sales were so strong previously that Japan would try and block the change. With the Japanese board of directors disapproving of the plan, Hayao Nakayama would need to step in, informing Kalinski that "I hired you to make the decisions for Europe and the Americas, so go ahead and do it." So with that said, Sonic would indeed become the packing game, and the rest is history. Sonic the Hedgehog does what Altered Beast don't, and that helps shift console units. The chaotic speed and mass marketing appeal of the blue blur was a cultural phenomenon, leaving the dated Altered Beast in the dust. In regards to all of this, Uchida mentions that he would visit the USA 3 years after it was announced that Alter Beast would be bundled with a system in the region. He would visit multiple US stores, but could not find his bundle anywhere. Only Sonic the Hedgehog, commenting that his biggest regret in his career was never visiting America back in the days when his game was being used to try and sell for Genesis. Despite the game not delivering quite the amount of success Sega were after with their Genesis hardware, the game's legacy and importance is undeniable. The game's striking design meant that Sega had a massive American arcade hit on their hands, with the game being so successful that it gave Sega the confidence to make Alter Beast the initial Genesis packing game. While the same level of success never fully translated to the homes, it's easy to see why Sega are so keen to continue to push this game. Even in Sega collections today, this one is capable of grabbing players' attention. Due to this, despite the gameplay itself being rather average, Alter Beast refuses to die. The game's great looking transformations, fantastic artwork and memorable voice samples means that we are all going to be hearing "Wise from your grave" for a long time to come. The game is simply that iconic and that important. As for Metamorphic Force, the game offers 4-player cooperative, allowing gamers to choose between 4 different characters who all have the ability to morph into different anthropomorphic beasts. These include the likes of Ban, a martial artist who can transform into an ancient Greek minotaur, Claude, a swordsman who can change into a white werewolf, Max, a fighter with a boxing style who can turn into a were-panther, and Ivan, a hunter and wrestler who has the ability to metamorphosize into a werebear, which I guess is the opposite of a Care Bear. Developed 5 years after Alter Beast, the influence is clear to see, with not only some familiar transformations being present, but ideas once again taken from ancient Greek mythology too. The game is the evolution, or should I say metamorphosis, of what a transformation early beat-em-up like Alter Beast could have become if it saw an early 90s sequel. The game opens up by informing gamers that this title is set in the year 1990 XAD, stating that after many years of peace and quiet, the evil king, ruler of the Empire of Horror, has arisen from the dead. Or should I say, wised from his grave. A mountain is then seen emerging from a stormy sea, with the king shown looking down maniacally from the sky, looking to reign over the world once more. But then the Greek goddess Athena shows up to throw a spanner in his works, with her declaring to the player, you must defeat his evil ways, and that the souls of the warriors and their 4 powerful metamorphic guardians, who contain this evil king in battle many years, have been revived once again to stop the villain. The souls of the 4 guardians return to Earth as brave youths in present time to stop the evil, with the game's attract screen introducing the foursome to potential players. Before the adventure starts, the game declares that one of the most fierce and desperate battles ever is about to begin. So with a promise like that on the table, who wouldn't want to insert a coin into this classic arcade cabinet? After characters have been activated on the character select screen, the heroes are seen being teleported to the mountain island seen in the intro, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers style, bringing gamers to this exciting action-packed video game's first stage. The opening level stylistically features a very similar setting to the opening area that can be found back in Alter Beast, offering a background laden with ancient crumbling pillars and ruins, overall doubling down on the mythological themes that this game is going for. Players will also quickly note that in this X-Men arcade-like beat-em-up, enemies tend to also come in the form of anthropomorphic beasts, meaning that this whole new world relies on metamorphic forces, as the title would suggest. Like Alter Beast, characters that the player controls start off stages in their human forms, but can take their more powerful beast forms by collecting golden statue power-ups, which are either dropped by enemies or found within random chests that are dropped from the sky above. The metamorphosis of playable fighters is particularly cool, as each is enveloped by an explosion of light that fills up half of the screen. Taking a leaf from Golden Axe's playbook, like the small elves found in that game, this title features anthro-rodent enemies that pop up at random times, who can supply the player with items that replenish health, those that increase the player's score, or simply golden statues to allow for metamorphosis. These items will be dropped at random times or can be grabbed instantaneously by striking these prize carrying opponents. Once again, related Metamorphic Force back to X-Men Arcade, or even Golden Axe once more for that matter, when characters are in their transformed beast states, they can perform screen-filling special attacks that destroy all of the enemies on the screen at once. As players progress through the first stage and into a temple-like setting, it becomes clear pretty quickly that elements of this game all around often look quite Golden Axe-like, aside from just the sack-carrying rodent enemies. The game looks and feels like X-Men Arcade, Golden Axe and Altered Beast all mixed into one, which certainly is not a bad combination at all. Every stage of course has a boss who must be taken down in order to move forward, which once again, like in the X-Men game, one of the titles I persistently will keep referencing, every boss fight opens with actual voice acting, allowing for each of them to deliver a cheesy quote. However, to be fair, we do not have anything quite as awesome this time as I am Magneto, Master of Magnet. The first boss fight takes place against Cabrios, a half-goat anthropomorphic opponent who wields a Grim Reaper-like sickle. While this boss and others offer a nice change of pace and variety of different attacks, one of the best elements included is their death animations, when each of them are defeated. Check out this for example. How satisfying is that? Action moves on to the internals of a fiery, lava-filled cave, where much of the same style action is offered, with more opponents popping up who look rather Golden Axe-like in nature. The high-intensity music that is playing throughout every area also massively adds to the overall intensity this epic affair offers, with a variety of instruments being simulated from electronic guitars to electronic keyboard symphonies. Wow! In this particular Cave of Fire, in the closing moments players must take down a burning phoenix-like anthropomorph, who can strike players with his sword or take gamers down taking advantage of his devastating flaming tornado attacks. This whole game looks and sounds freaking great. At points the game also offers bonus stages, this time drawing inspiration from the likes of Final Fight and Street Fighter, where instead of a car, this time fighters must destroy a huge statue within an allotted time. Doing this allows players to regain lost health and gain other benefits such as receiving gold statues for transformations. Stage 3 allows players to move from a fire to an ice themed setting, with more new enemies being introduced into the fold such as anthropomorphic elephants. There are also titans that pop up from the stage backdrop that open their mouths to spit out smaller opponents for the player to fight against. If you have never played this game before, and this section feels a little like deja vu, that would be because this feature appears to have been lifted straight from Konami's earlier X-Men Arcade game, which featured Sentinels rising up from the stage background and opening their mouth to unleash robotic opponents against the player. It is interesting to see so much familiarity surface throughout Metamorphic Force. The stage also features lasers that shoot players from a background which I think Konami-wise first showed up in Turtles the Arcade game, before finally taking on a chonky heavy robotic opponent who reminds me a lot of the X-Men Arcade game's Nimrod boss fight. Stage 4 takes place in a forest-like setting, the sort of region that always seems to pop up in these fantasy-themed brawlers. The stage is all around beautiful and very scenic, and sees other Konami beat-em-up elements included in the game for the first time. For example, when the players jump off a huge cliff edge down to a further layer below. At the end of this area, players must take down a two-headed giant monster. If players are able to deplete this bad mofo's health, eventually he turns to stone before exploding, leading to another satisfying end to a stage. The game also features a super high-speed bonus level that scrolls in much of the same way as the sewer surfing section found in Konami's Turtles in Time. This bonus round though scrolls at an even faster pace as players try and take down as many opponents as possible in a single run. Now, depending on which version of the game you play, whether it be the original Japanese version of the game or newer international release, the title will differ. In the Japanese version, players must simply play a stage involving just one new stage boss. However, in the international version, to allow for additional coin munching, players must now run a boss gauntlet against all previous end level opponents. Once all of these have been eliminated in this Colosseum setting, gamers must face off against a boobylicious, oversized she-devil who attempts to bring death by snoo-snoo to the player. The final stage sees players venturing into the Evil King's Keep, where of course the challenge on offer is brought up yet another notch. The stage is longer than those featured previously, with plenty of enemies in abundance, offering an assortment of those we have seen before. The whole area offers players a more intense challenge in an effort to drain those coins. A mid-stage boss fight eventually occurs against a roboticized skeleton, offering gamers a new foe to compete against. Defeating him reveals that the player has been fighting on a platform throughout the bout, leading to, of course, a classic beat-em-up lift section. Because as pointed out in every beat-em-up video I make, it is illegal to program a beat-em-up without including this mechanic somewhere. I have to say though, I do like the stained glass window in the background. Bloody marvellous, isn't it? Of course, as action progresses, the scene gets filled up with more and more enemies, often filling almost the entire screen at points. As players venture on, it is possible to battle against the evil king himself, who provides an adequate challenge for competitors. Being a game that is all about Metamorphic Force, this is of course not even his final thorn though, as upon his defeat, he metamorphosizes into a huge dragon-like beast, offering up the true final challenge for those who want to beat this arcade game once and for all. If, and I mean if, gamers can overcome this fiery onslaught, it soon unfolds that this is not the final challenge at all. And once his dragon form has been destroyed, his soul rises out of his body, offering yet another form that players must try their best to overcome. If players can get the best of him, the evil king is well and truly defeated in this third phase. Upon completion, as the game's credits roll, the king's castle can be seen crumbling Castlevania style, with our heroes leaping from the roof above. Soon the game reveals that not only is the castle crumbling, but the entire island that rose from the sea is descending back to its watery depths too. With the title stating, as a result of the fierce efforts of the four guardians, the evil king is defeated. The evil empire has sunk into the deep ocean and the people are freed from its threats. Peace is restored to the world. However, we fear the evil enemy may return someday, so till then, the four guardians will lay dormant until summoned upon again. With the game closing out, seeing our heroes ascend back to the heavens themselves, where Athena's shown expressing her pleasure. So that overall is what can be experienced within a playthrough of Metamorphic Force. As you can see, the game perhaps holds the crown of the most refined beat-em-up video game that features anthropomorphic transformation mechanics. While Altered Beast may have been the first game from this genre to include this eye-catching feature, Metamorphic Force will bring it back in true Konami style. With this said though, and the game being of such high quality, perhaps you may be wondering why this game does not get talked about more, but Altered Beast forever stays in the front of our retro gaming consciousness. Well, as stated, apart from Sega bringing back Altered Beast from its grave time and time again, when Metamorphic Force came out, it was never ported to any home consoles, and was left as an arcade exclusive. So the only gamers who got to play this one at the time were those who stumbled across it in the arcade. Whereas Altered Beast was a game that most Mega Drive owners owned in their homes in one form or another. Another factor to add to this game's overall obscurity today is that I feel that it is overshadowed by its much more famous licensed cousins. More people are likely to remember and celebrate the likes of X-Men Arcade, The Simpsons and the Turtles arcade games than they are likely to remember Metamorphic Force, simply due to the prestigious licenses attached to the former. Next, we also have to take into account that this game did not surface until 1993, 6 years after the original cooperative Double Dragon game, with the arcade market now completely flooded with high quality beat-em-ups throughout. So although this was a better game than Altered Beast in my opinion, I do not feel Metamorphic Force stood out as strongly in 1993 as Altered Beast did back in 1988 previously. But today, I think it's the bomb. Thinking about it, Metamorphic Force was packed to the brim with beat-em-up elements we had seen many times before this, but by combining them together and pairing them with the transformation gimmick, retrospectively it provided us with perhaps the most well-crafted brawler of this theme the world has ever seen. I think the game is criminally overlooked at times and delivers everything you would possibly want from this gaming genre. Metamorphic Force is the natural evolution of Altered Beast, an altered beast if you will, or even a metamorphic magnum opus. I challenge you to name me a better transformation themed beat 'em up than this one. This game is the ace of human to anthropomorphic adventures. The story of Altered Beast 2 starts with a man we have discussed before on this channel, Makoto Uchida. Uchida notes that when Sega themselves first considered reviving the Altered Beast license, he began to consider whether he wanted to take charge of the project and work with a team to proceed with development. During this time, Makoto states that he realised that it would take a huge amount of time and a lot of development staff to complete a 3D modern Altered Beast game. And moving into the new millennium and an era where the PlayStation 2 was now the most dominant game console, an opportunity would come up to make a new Altered Beast game a reality. Basically, Uchida identified that there was a chance to create a development house in China, a region where staffing was cheaper than in the US or Japan, where a bigger team could be easily afforded. Uchida told higher-ups at Sega that if they asked him to go to China, he would go. So both Uchida and Shinichiro Okamoto, one of the directors of the next Altered Beast game, would head to the region in 2002. Here they would help launch Sega Shanghai and continued their work on the new Altered Beast project. Uchida reports the collaboration between the Japanese and Chinese staff was tough, and there was a lot of hardships involved throughout the development process. Despite these challenges, on January 27th, 2005, after a long development cycle, a new Altered Beast for the PlayStation 2 would finally hit shelves in Japan. The game, titled Juki Project Altered Beast in the country, would function as a 3D action-adventure beat-em-up hack-and-slashy video game that offered a drastic paradigm shift in not only gameplay, but the title's story too. The ancient Greek aesthetics, which was a key theme previously in the original game, was completely excluded from this entry, with the entirety of this new title featuring a more modern-inspired environment. The game looks in many ways graphically typical of many releases from the PlayStation 2 era, and follows the story of a gentleman known as Luke Custer. Luke is not a regular human, as instead he is a genome cyborg. Essentially, his DNA and other genetic makeup has been artificially altered by microchips containing genetic makeup of other creatures, and this was years before Bill Gates would do this to most of humanity in real life years later. Due to this gene splicing, Luke has the ability to transform into a range of different anthropomorphic beasts, which is where the classic gimmick from the previous game comes into all of this. In this game's story, it starts with Luke surviving a helicopter crash but loses his memory in the process. Throughout the game, he sets off to learn the truth behind his past and how he has ended up the way he is. After the Japanese launch of the game would make its debut in Europe and other PAL regions, however the title would never make it to North American shores. A post from Game Informer in late 2004 reveals that Sega of America announced that they had no plans to publish or license the game in the region, with the article noting that they had heard that Sega were now being much more selective with the titles that they would bother to bring over from Japan, with the company opting to pass on Altered Beast for the new generation. Japanese and European gamers had the opportunity to play as Luke from a third-person perspective as they battled through hordes upon hordes of enemies in close combat, while trying to reach the end of each area. You know, standard beat-em-up stuff really, but now in a 3D environment. Like the original game, as mentioned, the playable character can transform into a range of different beasts, each with their own set of abilities and advantages in combat. Those who have played the arcade original will be able to recall that the original game's transformation animations were among the game's most striking features. This element is once again surprisingly pulled off very well in this newer Altered Beast game, with the pre-rendered cutscenes showing off the transformations taking place, with them all being stunningly well animated and offering great visual appeal once more. So the team can certainly be credited for at least managing to get this part of the game very right. In regards to Uchida himself describing this game and its transformations, he mentions that they prepared a lot of the beastmen in the game so that they could be used anywhere, allowing players the ability to transform into various beasts depending on the situation. He is proud that not only did each of these transformation results look different, but each one has their own unique actions, so even in the same place the way players play depends on which transformation they choose. He mentions that this was an effective way of giving players different ways in which they could play the game. Provided enough energy has been collected and different transformation abilities have been acquired through collecting the right items, unlike in the original incarnation of Altered Beast, players can now transform into any beast form at will. In the early stages, Luke can only transform into a werewolf, but more skills are unlocked as gamers make their way through the game. The items required to gain new powers are genome cyborg DNA chips, allowing Luke to become a Garuda, a Wendigo, a Minotaur, a dragon, and even a merman. As stated, each transformation of course comes with its own unique set of abilities, allowing players to overcome obstacles, puzzles, bosses, or whatever else stands in their way. In fact, after beating the game, additional transformation and gameplay modes can be unlocked, including a sort of boss rush feature. As for the transformations in the post-game, this includes a were-tiger transformation, a grizzly bear, and an alien-like creature. When it comes to the game's violent and somewhat slightly graphic nature, Uchida notes that he does cherish the atmosphere that the game brings to the table throughout, and that he felt that the direction of violence in the game could not be removed without taking away the title's flavour. In fact, he notes that the marketing department at Sega of America strongly advised him to try and make the game as violent looking as possible, which is not much of a shock really, considering that this was the gaming era that many marketeers were encouraging developers to make their titles as Grand Theft Auto 3 like as possible. I mean, just look at Final Fight Streetwise, the game is completely out of line from the rest of the franchise. Speaking of including violent elements, Uchida notes that he feels it is important in his work anyway. His previous work on Die Hard Arcade resulted in an exhilarating affair. Uchida said he is of the mentality that anything in a game is fine as long as it is refreshing. When making Altered Beast 2015, it was about trying to create a synergistic effect between violence and exhilaration, which obviously did not go to plan quite as well as he would have hoped for. Despite Uchida's best efforts working with his China-based team and some cool features here and there, sadly this Altered Beast game never ended up being the experience that fans were truly looking for. Journalists at the game's time of release would end up giving the title a tough time as well, so let's have a look at what the critics had to say. CNET would heavily criticise the shallow, repetitive gameplay that they felt the game offered, but would also comment on the game's aesthetics too, including warning readers about the game's violent nature, stating, "A word of warning, Altered Beast is quite a gory game, particularly with the beast transformation cutscenes, which show graphic images of tendons bursting, jaws being ripped apart, eyeballs exploding, and more. It's nothing the Mortal Kombat series hasn't shown before, but very young kiddies may need to be in the other room when you're playing it." In spite of the gore levels, over in Europe the game would only receive a 12 certification. Eurogame would choose to give this game a 2 out of 5 stars, with the journalist Ellie Gibson starting her piece off by stating that the original Altered Beast from 1988 is just plain old and was not worth resurrecting to begin with. Let me know what you think of that. She states that Altered Beast pushes over the borders of average but playable and into the realm of too irritating to bother with. There's the rubbish cameras which follow you about with all the speed and intelligence of, well, one of your enemies. The article in summary states, in short, we can't recommend Altered Beast to anyone. Had it arrived a few years earlier, it might have been worth a look, but now, like the original, it just feels dated. And since the shops of 2005 are full of shiny new handhelds and games that outclass this one by a mile, there are better things to spend your money on. PocketLint.com introduces their write-up by bringing to the conversation that a newly released remake of Altered Beast, originally a cult classic almost 17 years ago, seems to follow the same suit of many ill-fated films. They would conclude, like myself earlier, by complimenting the transformation cutscenes which they referred to as spectacularly detailed and realistic. However, they would criticise much else of what was on offer. They close off by stating overall the game is disappointing, especially after the success of the original. For those new to the series, don't bother buying it. Fans of the original would only buy this to complete a set. So, as you have probably garnered from everything I've laid out today, the Altered Beast sequel for the Sony PlayStation 2 offered nothing close to the memorable experience of a 1988 original. But what are Uchida's final words with regards to the positive side of this game? He states, "I always wanted to show something that everyone is happy with and surprise that. I wanted to show you something unusual. Whether you've played the previous work, Altered Beast, or you're new to Altered Beast, Project Altered Beast, there are lots of interesting things to play, so please look." Holding these thoughts in mind, this was my coverage of the history of the game. But according to Makoto Yoshida himself, the legend behind Golden Axe, Altered Beast and Die Hard Arcade, he wants you to try this game out for yourself, so you can make up your own mind on the matter. So, if you're one of a few people who have given this game a go yourself in the past, then why not let us know in the comment section down below exactly what you thought of this mostly forgotten game. The game in question is known as Altered Beast Guardian of the Realms, and this title existed in handheld form. Released on the Game Boy Advance towards the end of 2002, Altered Beast Guardian of the Realms was developed by a small Game Boy focused development studio called 3D6 Games. These guys worked exclusively on software to be used on either the Game Boy Color or the Game Boy Advance, but this did not seem to be the most sound business plan considering their fate. You see, 3D6 Games only operated for roughly 3 years, before shutting shortly after the release of this Altered Beast sequel, which raises the question, what went wrong here? Well, the release of a sequel to a long forgotten and largely considered mediocre franchise did not bring in the required income needed to keep them in business, of course. Who would have seen that one coming? As for the company's short history, founded in 1999 by William S. Schmidt and Troy Sheets, 3D6 Games cut their development teeth with Game Boy Advance titles such as Madden, NFL 2001, Tetris Worlds, and Disney's Atlantis: The Lost Empire. All forgettable, truly riveting gaming affairs. The company founder, Schmidt, is a rather prolific figure in the handheld development scene, and outside of 3D6 worked on titles such as Grand Theft Auto Advance and the Rayman 10th Anniversary Edition. He also went on to help produce games such as UFC Undisputed 3 and Fight Club on consoles, showing that he has chops outside of the world of portable gaming at least. Schmidt's co-founder, Troy Sheets, does not possess quite such a varied CV as his partner, having only really worked on the first DLC for long-forgotten MMO City of Heroes in his post-3D6 career. Here's the hoping that he bounces back and has the last laugh at some point though. So anyway, back to the game at hand. As we discussed earlier, Altered Beast Guardian of the Realms is a direct sequel to the classic, and it acts as if the whole "you are actually an actor in a film" revelation at the end of the arcade original never happened. Maybe it was all some sort of fever dream, and the sick player character was just rationalising his existence by putting his monster slaying habits in the context of acting. Or maybe they just decided to do away with what had always been a ridiculous piece of storytelling to begin with. Once again, the player takes the role of a Centurion, or Guardian if you prefer, resurrected by Zeus in order to stop the rebellious Dark Reaper, Arcanon. Arcanon, tired from serving at the whim of those on Olympus, stole the realm keys and with the aid of his newly formed army, takes over the fabled Hall of Realms. Seething at this betrayal, Zeus resurrects your bony behind to handle the problem, instead of dirtying his own lightning bolts taking down this powerful villain himself. However, you of course are not completely powerless in this affair, due to the fact that, as expected, Zeus gives you the power of Metamorphosis, granting the former corpse you control the ability to shift form into a variety of human-animal hybrids. A strong skill indeed, although I still think that the god of all gods is probably better equipped to handle this beef between deities and to save the entire universe than what is essentially a zombie with a pretty snazzy party trick. But what do I know? I'm the guy complaining about the lack of honey badgers in gaming. Speaking of games involving gods and Greek mythology, also games that lack honey badgers, franchises such as the God of War series have now massively outshined Altered Beast's significance. I can get you a huge 39% off of Ragnarok for the PS5 and thousands of huge discounts on other modern titles too. How about Shenmue 3 for under $3 for example? Get massive bargains and support this channel simultaneously by using my links via the pinned comment. Happy shopping! As for Guardian of the Realms, without a honey badger at all to talk about, the iconic wolf form makes a return from the original game, alongside the dragon and tiger forms, providing a quick nostalgia hit for those returning to the series. Accompanying these familiar transformations, 3D6 Games added a further 7 brand new animal forms for all the furries out there who salivate and fantasize over being inside them. Amongst these, we have a scintillating snake form, a shocking shark, a radical rhinoceros, and an elegant eagle, which all provide a far greater variety of different attacks than the previous entry in the quest to once again slay demons with. Further new additions include a scorpion form, a chimera-esque form, and most bizarrely, a spiked turtle form. Cowabunga indeed! Building on the gameplay, there are also talismans that you can collect through the title that slightly beef up your harem of animal alter egos, once again offering more depth, arguably at least, than the alter beast which started it all. Alongside these talismans are various different buffs, heals and shields that can be found throughout the stages. These all have rather amusing titles such as Armageddon, Berserk, Inner Fire, and my absolute personal favourite, Ambrosia. The delicious Devon custard that has been a staple in British schools for many glorious years, and it's extremely useful in this game as it functions as a full heal. For those who play Guardian of the Realms, the title offers 15 levels and accompanying boss battles for the player to tackle. From locales such as the island of Crete, a location where my family own a holiday home, and we have shot many episodes of handhelds around over there in the past. Thinking about it, why didn't I cover this game while shooting over there? What a squandered opportunity stylistically. Further from this, we have stages such as the Dreamscape, Vulcan and Despot. It's all a bit weird. Comparing this handheld title directly side by side with the original, I guess this makes the first game's offering of 5 levels seem pretty paltry, but let's not forget the advances in game memory storage between the development of the two titles. I must say that the new stages all look pretty lovely, and again are certainly an upgrade in the visual department compared to the original. In terms of other changes, these levels contain destructible assets, a series first, and are jam-packed with projectiles and enemies. The sprites, while small thanks to the Game Boy Advance's petite screen, look reasonably detailed, although the animation is rather choppy unfortunately. The backgrounds are all also rather pretty in their own way, giving the game an overall nice look, but nothing mind-blowing. Much like the series as a whole really then. As mentioned previously, each stage comes with a boss battle at the end of it. These brutally tough fights come in many different guises, such as a giant undead centurion warrior, a massive earthworm, and a tribal demon. Taking down these huge monstrosities is an incredibly difficult challenge, and if you deem yourself unable to complete these tasks single-handedly, then do not worry, as you're in luck, thanks to our old friend the link cable. 2-player co-op play is possible and is encouraged as it gives you a far greater chance at completing this tricky action platformer. Oh, how the link cable. Yeah. After you and your friend, that is if you have one, have bravely button mashed your way through the many levels of carnage, you face off against the evil Arcanon. In this foreboding encounter, the fate of the universe is in both sets of your undead and uneasy hands, as the tough as nails level swings into action. After a long battle against the goat-hooved Crimson Nightmare, the resurrected Guardian vanquishes Arcanon, who chooses to react like Darth Vader upon hearing the news of Padme's death. No! Glorious. With the universe saved and balance restored to the realms, the player is rewarded with a pat on the back from Big Daddy Zeus, and given the job of guarding the gates to the realm of eternity. Awesome, I think. Much like its predecessor, Alter Beast Guardian of the Realms split critics and audiences right down the middle. It earned a metascore of 63 on Metacritic, with reviewers praising the new animal forms and the wide variety of levels on offer. Unfortunately, many also felt it suffered from the same issues of repetition and shallow gameplay that the original Alter Beast also suffered from. However, pretty much every critic agreed on one undeniable truth. Guardian of the Realms is a better game and experience than the original Alter Beast, which I guess makes it all the more annoying that we continue to get the arcade Mega Drive conversion ported to every system for every compilation under the sun. This game won't die, it keeps rising from its grave. Reflecting on this game's history, we should say well done on this occasion to 3D6 Games for creating a mediocre sequel that surpassed the first game in almost every aspect. Still, it did not do 3D6 enough good in the financial department to save the company. Despite the company's demise, they did resurface briefly a decade later in 2012, where they would go through a brief stint of releasing mobile games. It seems that everything rises from its grave associated with this franchise. Guardian of the Realms is a sequel that no one asked for, and few people still have ever played, but is it worth a go for yourself? Well, I'm not sure, but you know what they say, one man's junk is another man's treasure, and you may very well experience some pleasure from this oddity. Before we dig deeper into this bizarre enigma of a video game, let's cover why such a title was created and released in the first place. For some, learning of the presence of Sega games on the Nintendo Entertainment System might seem surprising, considering that Sega and Nintendo were direct competitors during both the 8-bit and 16-bit console eras. However, despite their historic marketing feud, there are a few reasons why Sega games ended up on the NES regardless. Despite the brash, combative commercials produced by Sega America and Sega of Europe throughout the 90s, during the early stages of the console wars between the two brands, Sega took a rather different approach. You see, despite them having their own consoles, Sega's origins were in arcade game development, and their primary goal for arcade titles was to maximise exposure and profits. By licensing or allowing third-party developers to port their arcade hits to the NES, Sega could reach a much larger home console market. You have to remember that the NES or Famicom, as it was known as in Japan, was incredibly popular during the 1980s, and putting Sega's arcade games on it helped Sega generate more revenue from their already successful arcade titles. This strategy allowed the company to monetize their intellectual properties outside of their own consoles. Before the success of the Sega Genesis campaign stateside, the company found themselves in third place in the console wars, behind both Nintendo and NEC's PC Engine. During this time at home, Sega was still building its identity in the home market. So while they were indeed direct competitors with Nintendo, Sega's own home systems simply were not as successful at that time. By allowing popular Sega arcade games to appear on the NES helped increase their brand awareness and kept their name in the public eye. As the 16-bit era approached, Sega slowly became more aggressive in positioning their own hardware, especially during the peak of the Genesis era. But before this iconic period was in full swing, a share of Sega games officially made their way onto Nintendo's 8-bit console. For example, 4 Sega licensed games were released for the NES in the United States. These consist of Fantasy Zone, Shinobi, Alien Syndrome and Afterburner 2, which interestingly, if it were up to Nintendo of America, wouldn't have existed at all. Sega would license these games to Tengen, a home division of Atari, who would then publish their own conversions on the NES. These would be released on black custom cartridges, as Tengen didn't obtain an official license from Nintendo in 1989. This was because Nintendo of America had much stricter licensing policies for the NES compared to Nintendo of Japan. Nintendo heavily controlled what games could be published on the NES, requiring third-party publishers to sign exclusive agreements that limited their ability to develop for other consoles if they wanted to use NES cartridges. Harsh policies like this made life extremely difficult for publishers, but over in Japan, with less restrictions, a slightly larger number of Sega games were released for the Nintendo platform. In Japan, Sega had agreements with specific third-party developers and publishers who handled the Famicom ports of their arcade games, such as Sunsoft, Taito and others. Unlike stateside, these publishers had the legal rights to distribute the games in Japan, but not necessarily worldwide, hence why you couldn't officially play titles like Altered Beast on the hardware elsewhere. Licensing agreements often varied by region, so the companies who had the rights to release Sega games in Japan on the Famicom didn't always have the ability or interest to release them internationally on the NES. Thus why Altered Beast on the platform didn't play a part in our childhoods. As for Sega games that were strictly on the Famicom variant of the hardware, amongst the releases, Japan got Fantasy Zone 2, Space Harrier, and of course most poignantly today, a game called Jockey, a title that can be translated into English as Beast King Chronicle or Chronicle of the Beast King, the name Altered Beast franchise goes by in Japan. Manufactured and distributed by Asmik Corporation under license from Sega Enterprises Limited in 1990, this version of Altered Beast is completely different to any other that you would have experienced. While far from the only 8-bit version of the game, due to the fact that Sega licensed the game to be released across various home computer formats, and of course their own Sega Master System, the Famicom iteration of this game dramatically stands out, in part thanks to including a number of stages and transformations that cannot be enjoyed in any other version of the game. What's really crazy is that, thinking about it, this is way more than an arcade conversion. It's essentially a full-on reimagining packed to the brim with new content and features. You could say that this is an altered Beast, due to the dramatic transformation that the Asmik Corporation would implement when producing this game. So let's begin breaking down how this version differs from the 16-bit Sega produced versions that most of you are familiar with. Well, for starters, as to be expected really, the graphical presentation included in the game make the title visually distinct from its source material. There was absolutely no way that the Famicom was remotely capable of delivering an experience that featured graphics reminiscent of what was at the time at least one of the most visually striking games that had ever shown up in arcades. This means that sadly what we got is a lot more rudimentary looking, and the eye-popping transformation cutscenes that were present with the original are nowhere to be found here. Instead, all of the action unfolds within the confines of the playable stages themselves. Tragically, the infamous "Wise Whom Your Grave" voice sample is absent too, further reminding us that this is no arcade game. Building on the limitations between versions, the developers would of course also have control issues to contend with. After all, the Sega Mega Drive featured a 3-button control layout, whereas the Famicom offered a more humble 2. On the Mega Drive, the buttons are simplistically mapped to punch, a kick, and the ability to jump. So with one button less this time around, the Famicom buttons would be used for exclusively kicking and punching. If you want to jump in this one, sadly you have to press up on the D-pad instead, something I must add I did find quite annoying when playing. However, beyond these obvious drawbacks, there are still a number of features that impress me about this game that in my opinion deserve at least some respect and celebration. While certainly not the best NES title I've ever played, for the most part it is competent. However, it's the ways it's superior to other versions of Altered Beast which I find the most interesting. For example, the Sega Master System edition of Altered Beast had one of the original arcade stages cut, but this iteration on competing hardware contains 8-bit versions of every stage that can be experienced in the original. Not only that though, but as mentioned earlier, more insanely, this version includes brand new stages and transformations, created seemingly from scratch by the Asmik Corporation, bespoke for this release. After beating the first stage in the game, that largely tries its best to emulate the source material, players are thrust into a completely unique level. Here, players find themselves in what appears to be a dark countryside landscape, reminiscent of the backdrop that can be found within the first stage of Ghosts and Goblins. Speaking of that game, difficulty in this one can often feel extremely frustrating, but at least we can take more than 2 hits per stage, which is more than what can be said with this Altered Beast conversion. What I found most annoying is having to compete against jumping enemies, while only being able to use up on the D-pad to jump. It feels kind of off when you are using the same D-pad to aim left and right. But criticisms aside, like with other versions of Altered Beast, you instantly feel like you have more power and freedom from the moment you manage to collect enough orbs to transform. During this outing, you get to turn into a Lion Man, like in The Wizard of Oz, gaining the ability to do damaging spin jumps like Sonic the Hedgehog and throw Hadoukens. No powers exactly that I would associate with the Cowardly Lion, but it's fun nonetheless. These abilities can be used to wreck an ogre at the end of a stage before progressing to the next one. Just like in the original, the stage is back where you can transform into a dragon, but unfortunately in this instance, his awesome electrical attack has been substituted for an awkward looking kick. So there's lots of little drawbacks like that. As for the new stages, we do not receive another until stage 5, which brings us around to this game's underwater ruins. Fortunately, this water only functions as a stage backdrop, so I won't have to downgrade my thoughts on the game, complaining that it has too much water. After all, my thoughts aren't as shallow as that. I'm not a game journalist. Dangerous threats emerge that would be enough to take an Australian zookeeping conservationist's life, but fortunately for our altar beast on this occasion, he has the new ability to be able to change into a shark, a transformation that has enough speed to avoid being penetrated by such stinging barbs. In addition to these, there is another stage unique to this game, where our beast warrior can transform into a phoenix, allowing players to fly around this new volcano-ridden environment at ease. Aside from all of that, the game is what it is, the usual plodding Alter Beast experience, just with some additional pros and cons. Due to the cons, it would be impossible to refer to this as the best Alter Beast, but with its many additional features, it is certainly the most unique version of the original game, and for this reason, it more than deserved spotlighting today. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video but want to play something actually good, don't forget you can get up to 90% off thousands of different games simply by using my affiliate link. I hope you all treat yourself to something nice, and I'll see you all again soon. Cheerio!